So I haven't made a Brexit video in a little while. I thought I'd make one now. There hasn't been very much progress on the Brexit front. We certainly don't seem to be leaving anytime soon, until at least October. It's now been delayed by a further 6 months by Theresa May. So, but I was thinking the other day, last couple of days, and today even, that what happened to Brexit? Because if you look throughout history, if you look at recent history even, thinkers like Tony Benn, Jeremy Corbyn, those on the hard left of politics, they used to be very anti-EU. They used to be quite Eurosceptic. Tony Benn campaigned to not join the EU in the first place in the 70s, not join the common market, because he saw the EU as an intrinsically capitalist venture. It would allow cheap labour to be exploited and manoeuvred freely around Europe, to be exploited by capitalist governments. That was one of the reasons he was against the EU. The other reason is he believed it would undermine British democracy, because certain bodies in the EU aren't accountable democratically. They aren't. The actual member states don't vote on certain. Obviously, we've got the EU elections coming up shortly, but committees and things, those roles are appointed. They're not democratically elected, and that's what another reason he was against the European Union, because it undermined democracy, and for a number of other reasons. Also, because the EU would never allow the full nationalisation of public services that the left, particularly the hard left in British politics, are so for. The nationalisation of the railways, the NHS, the mail, all these bodies that the left wing want to nationalise as opposed to privatise. The EU would never allow that. They would only allow us to go so far in nationalisation before they stopped us. So that's another reason he was anti-EU. And Jeremy Corbyn was anti-EU for many of the same reasons. Remember that Tony Benn was his mentor. So Jeremy Corbyn was anti-EU for those similar reasons. And then when he became the leader of the Labour Party, leader of the opposition, he largely transgressed on those views. He largely compromised on those views and became quite a Remainer. Obviously, he must still have his own personal opinions, his own personal views, but for the sake of his party, he campaigned to remain. He became something of a Remainer. He argues now from a Remain perspective. What happened there? Well, I think it's because the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, the PLP, institutionally, Labour became such a staunchly pro-EU, pro-European Union party, whatever you want to call it, that Corbyn was threatened with a complete revolt by his own side, by his own party. His own MPs would have completely revolted against him and would have probably kicked him out by now if he kept sticking to his Eurosceptic views, his Eurosceptic beliefs. And I think that allowed hard-right, xenophobic speakers like Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, to dominate the Brexit debate on the Leave perspective. There was no real voice during the campaign just before the referendum. There was no real voice for a left-wing exit. The only left-wing voice you would have got for an exit would have been on the fringes, on the back benches of the Labour Party or the left-wing parties. You would have got no real voice for a left-wing case for leaving the EU. We got plenty of right-wing coverage for why we should leave the EU, take back control of our borders, rules and regulations, clamp down on immigration. All this kind of stuff was coming out of the mouths of front benchers. Boris Johnson, people like that. Nigel Farage is quite prominent in politics. But people who are Eurosceptic, anti-EU, in the Labour Party and in other left-wing parties, people like Dennis Skinner, who comes from Bolsover, from a Eurosceptic community, Eurosceptic constituency, who is a Eurosceptic, his voice was never heard. He was never interviewed on the BBC or Sky News or any of these, because the conversation was being dominated by left-wing Remainers, hard-right Eurosceptics, people who want to leave the EU. There was no, they never interviewed left-wing Brexiteers, left-wing people, left-wing Eurosceptics, people on the left-wing who wanted to leave the European Union, and they never really interviewed, for the purposes of being fair, they never really interviewed right-wing people that wanted to remain either. So it was quite interesting that that side was left wing, that side was right wing, and it's split. And particularly young people would have seen that and thought, well, leaving the European Union is a right wing thing to think. It's a racist endeavour. It's a racist thing to think. Now I voted to leave the EU. I voted leave. I've always spoken openly about that, spoken freely about it, and I do regret my vote, because at the time of the vote, it was a rash decision. It was made on principle. I voted on principle as opposed to actually expecting it to happen. Like many people, I think, across the country, I fully expected a Remain vote. So it was almost a protest vote for me, a rash decision just because. And it was also, I never stopped to think that I would be handing direct control of the negotiations to a Tory government. A Tory government that called the referendum for selfish reasons. Remember, Cameron called the referendum because he didn't want his own party revolting against him. Called it for selfish reasons. Fully expected a Remain vote, as I did. And then got a Leave vote. And ever since then, for the last 3 years, has been implementing that Leave vote, again, selfishly, for their own selfish reasons. Because they know that if they don't deliver on that vote, they will arguably consign themselves to electoral oblivion. So it's been said, the implementation has been selfish. The reason it was called was selfish. I believe that I should have abstained on that vote. I should have waited for a decent socialist government to be in place, maybe under Corbyn, maybe under someone else, I don't know, before I entertain the idea of possibly voting to leave the European Union. So I blame partly myself for that vote, partly David Cameron and his co for calling it so selfishly and calling it at the time they called it. But what's done is done. I can't take back my vote. If there was a second referendum, I would probably abstain. But I think is what happened to Brexit. That I think is why we're in the mess we're in, because there was no perspective. It was a very, very vague question on the ballot sheet: should the UK leave the European Union? That was the only question. Yes, no. There was no detail. Nobody said, this is what's going to happen if we vote to leave, this is what's going to happen if we vote to remain. And I believe the Remain campaign also should share their fair share of the blame as well, because they didn't argue the pros of staying in the EU. They didn't argue, really, the benefits of the EU. They only argued what the terrible, terrible things that would happen if we left the EU. The same as the Leave campaign was based on xenophobia and fear of migrants and taking control of the borders. They never argued the benefits of leaving the EU. They never argued, really, the good stuff. They only argued the fear-mongering side, and the Remain side only argued, again, the fear-mongering side of leaving. They didn't really argue the benefits of staying. So the whole thing is fucked. The whole thing is messy, and it's just ridiculous now. But that's what I think happened with Brexit. That is why I think we're in the mess that we're in now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.